very pleased to speak to you this afternoon. It's something Jamie and I talked about at the conception of this this event, and very deliberately came on the words why we can't delay as part of this presentation for me. And the reason for that is that, if I can get my slides to move on, there's two sides to the phrase. First of all, and this is what I'm going to cover in my presentation with some bits. First of all, we can't delay because we need to act now when it comes to speed. And secondly, we can't delay because journey time is seen as a journey time disbenefit is seen broadly as a barrier to some of the interventions that we want to introduce. And I'm going to cover some little bits. I know some of the other presenters have already covered some of those today, but going to go into a little bit of detail about what that actually means in practice. So to start with, I'm going to talk about why we need to act now, and this is taking some evidence from research that I recently conducted, doing some collision investigation work and looking at the system-based investigations around those fatal collisions. And it's really important to stress that this is a different investigation process to what the police undertake. The work I did used the fatal files that are put together by the police. I was based within their office for 6 months, looking at these files and had access to all of that forensic information. But the process itself looks very differently about what happens and why, in particularly why things happen within the crashes, and how those system factors, looking at all levels right up to international influences on the situation, how they come together in the events that lead up to a collision happening and the events that occur as a result. So that is very different to the information that you would then find in Stats 19, and I think that's important to say from the outset. So speed as a factor in collisions. I know some of the writing on here is relatively small, but just to give an overview of the random sample of 10 collisions. So in that 2018 to 2020 period, which was the time frame that I was looking at, there were 85 fatal collisions in Cambridgeshire, and I took a random sample using random number generator of 10 of those to look into, and this is an overview of what those collisions were. So one involved a pedestrian, 2 involved bicycles and motor vehicles. There were a number that involved a vehicle leaving the road, head-on collision, there was 1, rear end or side swipe, there was 1, and 1 was at a junction involving no turning, 1 was at a junction involving vehicles turning. And then the last hazard I've got there that was included was around access to services. And I think this is really important in the context, particularly we hear about some of what Pete was saying earlier around the importance of mobility and access to services and the value that people have on that. So actually the hazard that presented as a result of these collisions was actually linked to insufficient access as well. And that was very prevalent. So how much of a factor was speed in these collisions? Out of those 10 collisions, and you see here, these are the top factors that came up from the investigation. In the second column there, you've got who that relates to as a factor, and then the final column, the number of cases. So we see in terms of the top 2 there are speed related. So Susie talked very well earlier about the design and speed limit guidance and how that relates to road conflicts, and so using that evidence, how that demonstrated in 8 of the collisions that was a factor in why the outcome was a fatality. And then similarly from the local highway authority perspective, the speed limits were set above the safe speeds for those conflicts that occur. Third one, again, speed related, above recognised safe speed. Then we have 2 related to inadequate protection from roadside hazards or roadside objects. And then again, people travelling too fast, either exceeding the speed limit or too fast for conditions. And then the final one, the second to last one there, was around either fraudulent or shouldn't have been accessing the road for a number of reasons. And the final one there around this kind of what we've talked about earlier on today in terms of the perception of speeding and how that's presented in terms of its acceptability and how that should be tackled better. So we hear lots of statistics around factors involved when we look at Stats 19 and we look at the contributory factors there. A recent piece of work that we've done at National Highways suggests around 46% of the factors are related in some way to speed. Clearly, from this in-depth investigation work from a number of a random sample of fatal collisions, speed is very, very prevalent as a factor in the outcome of those. So that's something that I wanted to point out. So from that research work, I should say the link there on the screen takes you to the published report, which is free to access. From that, 2 recommendations specifically. There were actually a number of recommendations, but these 2 kind of condensed down specifically in relation to speed management. And this links very much with what Susie was saying earlier, that we need, as an industry, to review the design standards in line with that best practice evidence around conflict speeds, and we need to use that in our guidance and in the national guidance that's put together for design and in the way that we set our speed limits going forward. And the last one that I mentioned in terms of the factors, that this normalisation of speeding needs to be addressed, and we need to have controls put in place to support safe speeds. I think we've already heard, certainly there's been a lot of talk in the chat about ISA, but I know it was mentioned in some of the presentations as well, that ISA is one way that could be done. But there are many others in terms of the way that we can look in terms of compliance. So from my perspective and the research work that I've undertaken, that demonstrates why we can't delay in terms of our action, and we really need to see, and it's very pleasing to see some of the work that's already been undertaken by authorities in relation to speed limit reduction, but also in terms of speed management or improving the infrastructure, as Susie mentioned earlier, as an alternative option to make the current speeds safe. So moving on to journey time disbenefit as a barrier. And I think it's really important to pick up on something that Pete mentioned earlier around, this misperception around speed and journey time, and that our perceptions and the reference points we use are not necessarily accurate in terms of the way that presents. And I think where I'm going with this, it very much links with something that Laura said as well in the last presentation around loss of life shouldn't be overshadowed by traffic delays. But I think what I'm about to show you is that in economic terms, sometimes that is worse than the case. So the basis for this is a piece of work by Ezra Hoyer in the US, and he looked at historical value for money kind of calculations, and looked at the value of traffic delay in America, which I think was taken on 2003 data, so it's relatively a little bit older now. And at that time, traffic delay was calculated at $11.20 per hour, which, if you worked up lots of little delays at a junction or as part of a route, if you added all of those 30-second delays up for hundreds of thousands of vehicles over, and added that up to a year's worth of time delay, that would equate to a value of $98,112. At the time, the value for a quality adjusted life year in America was $98,527. So effectively in the US at that time, the economic assessment said the delay in traffic is equivalent in value to life, which really struck a chord and gives us a lot of food for thought in the way we look at things economically. Now, looking at the UK, so using that as a basis, I looked at what calculations we do in the UK. I'm interested to understand whether people think that we would do better than that or we would do worse than that. Well, let's start off with the value of 1 hour of traffic delay in the UK is £13.31 per hour, according to the Green Book figures. So doing that same calculation, working that up times 24 times 365, a year's worth of traffic delay is valued at £116,596 based on current Green Book figures. When we look at quality adjusted life year for the UK, the figure is £75,000. So effectively, what we say in the UK is traffic delay is valued 1.5 times more than life. And personally, I don't think that's right. I think, but it gives us some, coming back to what Pete was saying about misperceptions and reference points. It's really important for us to understand that in the way that the financial calculations are based, this is inherent in those figures, and that's something that we need to consider in the way we overcome that in the business cases we put together and use that more in the strategic case and how we assess actually these are the priorities for the schemes that are being put forward. And I think Fiona made mention that it is something that we are looking at within the way that National Highways assesses schemes. Lots of work to be done there, but something that is being looked at and is ongoing. So what I wanted to say out of this, when we talk about the both of these aspects, is actually our reference point really matter. And I come back again to what Pete was talking about in his presentation. And what do we value? We've talked there about the hard cash if we come to economic assessments, but actually, what we've seen as part of the pandemic is we have seen changes in what we value in transport, changes in the way that we do travel, the times we travel, the times we choose to go into the office, the times we don't. And I think understanding what we value helps us to understand that actually what we might need to change in the way we assess these schemes. Actually on an individual basis, is a minute any different for me on a journey that normally takes me 25 minutes? If you said, right, tomorrow it's going to take you a minute longer, does that actually make a massive difference to me as an individual? But if I know that every day that it will take that 26 minutes, then I might be quite willing to accept that. Whereas if you say, well, today it take you 25, but tomorrow it might take you 2 hours, and tomorrow and the day after it'll be 40 minutes. Actually, do we value that reliability more than we value the time? It's the speed of the journey itself. So I think that gives us some really important questions to consider in the way what do we actually value when we're talking about speed and journey time and the way what these schemes are looking to achieve. Another thing we do is that we use the current situation as a reference point. All of our assessments and all of our processes look back at what is the current situation, rather than looking at what do we want this to look like at the end point. So what we see then is this perpetual cycle of assessments that say no worse than the current situation, but actually all we do is end up going round and round in a circle and potentially moving very small increments in the direction we want to travel. However, if we used what we want, and Susie talked about the functional speed and matching that with the design speed, the speed limit, and actual speed. If that's what we want to achieve, actually we should be using that functional speed as the reference point rather than what the current speeds are in terms of where we want to move to. So I think, again, the reference point we use really makes a difference to the way we assess and the way that we move things forward. And finally, from our own perspectives as drivers, as road users, we have this reference point of the national speed limit for restricted roads is 30 in England, and for single carriageway roads is 60. If that was to change tomorrow, and then a new driver starts to learn the following day, their reference point of what the normal restricted road speed limit is, or the normal national speed limit is, changes. But every day that goes past that doesn't change, those new drivers that start learning tomorrow, the day after, keep the current limits as their reference point. So, and this comes back to the point I made before about current speeds being the point of reference in the assessment, is actually we do that ourselves as well. Well, currently this road looks like a 30. Well, if we'd always been told that road looked like a 20, how would we drive it? If we'd always been told that road looked like a 50, not a 60, how would we drive it? Or even a 40, how would we drive it if that was what we'd always been told? So I think that is a really important way for us to consider how these decisions not just impact immediately, but how they impact in the future as we go forward.